She ripped them apart with her bare hands. Not one bouquet, not two. Every single arrangement in the room, the white roses, the lilies, the elaborate sprays that had taken Claire Rowan's team 14 hours to prepare, reduced to scattered petals and broken stems on the cold tile floor of Hartwell Funeral Home. And the person doing it wasn't a drunk relative, wasn't a grieving husband losing his mind. It was an 8-year-old boy. Elliot Mercer stood in the center of the destruction he'd made, breathing hard through his nose, his small hands still fisted at his sides, green stems crushed in his fingers. Nobody moved. The funeral director pressed himself against the wall. 2 women in black dresses had gone completely silent mid-sentence. A man in the back had his phone halfway to his ear and forgot to dial. Across the room, through the wide doorway that connected the reception hall to the main parlor, stood Vincent Moretti. He was watching. If you've ever wondered what it looks like when a man who controls half of Chicago's criminal infrastructure feels genuinely helpless, it looks like that. Vincent Moretti, 51 years old, 6'2", a face that had made grown men apologize for things they hadn't even done yet, standing perfectly still with his hands loose at his sides, watching his 8-year-old nephew destroy $4,300 worth of funeral flowers and not doing a single thing about it. Drop a like right now and tell me in the comments what city or country you're watching from. I want to see how far this story has traveled. And if you want to know what Elliot was really trying to say with those flowers, subscribe and follow this story all the way to the end. You will not see the ending coming. The flowers had arrived that morning. Claire had driven the van herself, which she almost never did anymore. But this was the Mercer funeral. Elena Mercer, 43 years old, dead of a brain aneurysm 9 days ago, leaving behind 1 child and a brother-in-law who had called Claire's shop 4 times in 3 days to confirm the order. Not Vincent, his assistant. Always his assistant. A thin-voiced woman named Dolores, who spoke like she was reading from a card. Mr. Moretti wants to confirm the white roses are premium grade. Mr. Moretti wants to know if the arrangements can be assembled on site. Mr. Moretti wants assurance that nothing will look cheap. Claire had said yes each time professionally and then gone back to her work table and felt a quiet unease she couldn't name. Not about the man, about the order. 43 white roses, ivory lilies, no wildflowers, no color, nothing informal. A beautiful order, a cold order. She'd pulled the original intake form when she got to the shop that morning. The handwriting in the notes column was hers, from the initial phone call 3 weeks earlier, before Elena Mercer got sick, when she'd called to arrange a general use account for a standing corporate order. In the margin, barely legible, Claire had jotted, "Prefers wildflowers, daisies especially, hates formal arrangements, said so twice." That note had not made it into the final order. She stood over it for a moment, then put it in her apron pocket and loaded the van. The funeral home smelled the way they all smelled. Underneath the flowers, underneath the carpet cleaner, and the air freshener, something chemical and faintly sweet that no amount of roses could fully cover. Claire had learned years ago to breathe through her mouth the first 10 minutes. After that, her body adjusted. She was finishing the last arrangement, anchoring a spray of ivory lilies into a tall pedestal vase near the portrait of Elena Mercer, when she first noticed the boy. He was sitting in a folding chair against the far wall, alone, wearing a dark blue suit that was about a half-inch too short in the sleeves. His shoes were very clean. Someone had made sure of that. His hands were in his lap and he was looking at the flowers. Not at his mother's portrait, at the flowers. Claire glanced around. The room was filling slowly. Relatives arriving, low conversations starting up near the door. A woman she'd learn later was Vincent's sister-in-law kept touching her pearl necklace and saying the flowers were beautiful, just beautiful. Nobody was looking at the boy. Claire looked back at him. He hadn't moved, but something in his face had shifted. She'd worked enough grief into her hands over the years, 14 years of making arrangements for the dead, to know the difference between a sad face and a calculating one. That boy was thinking hard about something. She finished the lily spray and moved to check the arrangement closest to him, not directly toward him. At an angle, adjusting a rose she didn't actually need to adjust. He still didn't look at her. She crouched down, fussing with the base of the pedestal, bringing herself to his eye level. Up close, his jaw was set in a way that seemed too old for his face. His eyes were dry. She had the sudden sense that he had cried himself completely out sometime in the past 9 days and had arrived here already empty. "These are nice flowers," she said quietly. Not to him exactly, more like to herself. He didn't respond. "Not my favorites," she added. His eyes moved, just a flicker, toward her, then back to the arrangement. She straightened up and moved on. She was in the side hallway 15 minutes later, untaping a secondary supply box, when she heard it. Not a crash, more like a sustained rustling, a deliberate sound, things being pulled and dropped. She came back through the doorway and stopped. The boy was standing at the nearest arrangement. He had both hands in it. As she watched, he pulled a white rose out by the stem, looked at it for 1 second, and set it on the floor beside him, then reached in and pulled another. The woman with the pearls made a sharp noise. "Oh! Someone stop him!" Claire moved before she thought about it, not toward the boy. She stepped sideways, putting herself between him and the woman, and raised one hand just slightly. The woman stopped. The boy was working methodically. He wasn't angry, exactly. Or if he was, the anger was very contained, purposeful. He went through one arrangement, then moved to the next. White roses on the floor, lilies on the floor. The formal, expensive greenery stripped out and dropped. He left anything that wasn't white and formal. A small spray of baby's breath. One stalk of something that had gotten tucked in almost accidentally. Lavender, leftover from another order. He moved his hand around it and left it standing. Claire watched him closely. Her throat had gone tight. He knew what he was doing. Vincent Moretti appeared in the doorway. She didn't know who he was yet. She'd taken the order through Dolores. She knew the name, knew it the way anyone in Chicago knew it, from the edges of news stories, from careful conversations, from the fact that whenever it came up, people's voices dropped half a register. But she hadn't expected to recognize him physically, and when she looked up, she did, immediately, which told her she'd absorbed more of those news stories than she'd realized. He was very still. He was looking at the boy. His face was doing something complicated. The funeral director appeared beside him, speaking quickly and low. Vincent didn't turn his head. He said one word. It was too quiet for Claire to hear. And the funeral director went silent. Vincent looked at Claire. She looked back. He came into the room. "He does this," Vincent said. Not an apology. Not quite an explanation either. He stopped about 3 feet from Claire, keeping his voice low, his eyes still tracking the boy. At the house. He moved all the flowers outside, every arrangement people brought, set them in the yard. "Did anyone ask him why?" Claire said. Vincent's jaw shifted. "He doesn't talk." "Since when?" A pause. "Since Elena died." Claire watched Elliot carefully remove a cluster of ivory roses from the largest arrangement. He set them down gently. Not violently. Carefully. As if he was sorting, not destroying. "He's not destroying them," she said. Vincent turned his head toward her. "What?" "He's sorting them. Look at what he's taking out versus what he's leaving." She kept her voice neutral, just observational. "He pulls the white roses, the formal lilies. Anything that looks like it came from a catalog. The lavender, he went around. The baby's breath, same thing. He's taking out what doesn't belong." Vincent looked at the boy for a long moment. Something moved through his expression that she couldn't categorize. "Elena hated formal flowers," he said. His voice had changed, lower, rougher. "She used to say they looked like—" He stopped. "Like they belonged in a hospital," Claire said. He looked at her sharply. "People say that," she said. "A lot of people who prefer wildflowers say that." She reached into her apron pocket and pulled out the intake form, held it out to him. "Your original account notes. From the first call, 3 weeks ago." He took it, read it. His face went through several things very quickly. Confusion, then recognition, then something harder and colder that made the air in the room feel slightly different. "Who placed the final order?" he said. "Your account coordinator, someone named Sophia Marino." The name landed on his face like a stone on still water, just for a second. Then everything smoothed out and he was controlled again, except for his hands, which had closed the paper into a tight fold without seeming to notice they were doing it. "I see," he said. Elliot had stripped 3 arrangements bare. He was moving to the 4th. Claire didn't try to stop the boy. She watched him work. and when he reached the fourth arrangement and pulled out the last of the white roses and set them in a pile, she went back to her supply case. She had paper with her. She always had paper, a habit from years of making quick sample flowers for clients who couldn't visualize arrangements. She folded a daisy. Simple, 6 petals, the kind she could make in under 2 minutes without thinking about it. Paper, plain white, nothing fancy. She walked over to where Elliot was standing in the wreckage of the arrangements, surrounded by stems and petals, the expensive formal flowers scattered in piles around his feet, the vases standing almost empty. She crouched down in front of him. He watched her, wary, his hands still at his sides. She set the paper daisy on top of one of the empty pedestals, right next to his hand. He didn't take it, but he didn't step back. She stayed crouched, not pushing, not waiting for anything specific. He looked at the paper flower for a long time. Then he looked at the bare vases, then back at the paper flower. He picked it up. He held it between both hands very carefully, the way you hold something you don't want to crush, and he looked at it with an expression that cracked something open in the center of Claire's chest without warning, and she had to look away for a moment, adjusting the pedestal base, giving herself 2 seconds to get her face back in order. When she looked back, he had placed the paper daisy exactly in the center of the largest empty vase, centered it with both thumbs. Then he stepped back and looked at it, and his face was still and quiet in a way that was different from the closed-off stillness he'd had since she arrived. This was the stillness of someone who had finally said the right word. Vincent, from across the room, made a sound that was not quite a word, just breath, released. The woman with the pearls started crying, which was inconvenient because she had been very opposed to the situation 5 minutes ago and now seemed to feel that her crying should be the emotional centerpiece of the moment. 2 of the older men in the room had gone very quiet. The funeral director had given up trying to appear professionally composed and was simply standing near the door looking at the boy. Sophia Marino, when she arrived 20 minutes later, walked into a room that felt entirely different from the one she'd been expecting. Claire knew her the moment she walked in, not from description, but from the way the room shifted. Vincent turned his head. His expression didn't change, but his posture did something subtle, a compression, like a machine taking on load. Sophia was younger than Claire had expected. Mid-30s, well-dressed, the kind of compose that takes effort to maintain. She took in the room, the stripped vases, the flowers on the floor, Elliot standing near the portrait with the paper daisy now in his hand, the intake form folded in Vincent's fist. And her face cycled through 3 expressions in about 1 second. Surprise. Recovery. Calculation. "Vincent," she said, moving toward him with her arms slightly open. "I heard there was some kind of—" "Don't." His voice was quiet and completely flat. She stopped. The open arms lowered. He held up the intake form. Elena wanted wildflowers. It wasn't a question, not an accusation, technically, just a statement, delivered in a tone that made everyone near them take a small, unconscious step backward. Daisies, informal arrangements, nothing like what was ordered. "I was thinking of the family," Sophia said, "of appearances. Some of our associates were coming, and I thought—" "You thought," he said. She stopped again. "You thought." He looked at the form again, then folded it once more and put it in his jacket pocket. When he looked back at her, his face was completely composed, which was somehow worse. "Get out. Vincent, out of this building, off the account. Don't call Dolores." He turned away from her. "We're done." Sophia's composure held for exactly 3 more seconds. Then she looked at Claire, a look that was supposed to be contemptuous and landed closer to frightened, and walked out. The room breathed again. Vincent stood near the window for a while after that. Claire reassembled what she could. Nothing like the original order, which was gone, but she had supplies in the van and she spent 20 minutes pulling together what she had. Lavender. Some loose white freesia. Real daisies, 3 bunches, that she'd had left from another order that morning. A length of greenery that wasn't polished and formal, but had some wildness to it, rosemary sprigs still slightly fragrant. She worked fast. She didn't ask Vincent anything. She just worked. At some point, he came to stand near her work table, a folding table she'd set up near the doorway, and watched her hands. "You always carry daisies," he said. "Not always. Today I did." "Why?" She glanced at him, then back at her hands. "Left over from a wedding yesterday. The bride wanted something less traditional." She finished a small arrangement and set it aside. She cried when she saw the final version, said it looked like her grandmother's garden. She started on the next one. That's what I'm trying for. Not impressive, real. Vincent was quiet for a moment. Elena had a garden, he said, when she was a kid. Our parents' yard. What grew in it? He thought about it, and something happened in his expression, something small. The faintest loosening, like a knot that shifts without coming undone. Daisies, and some kind of purple thing. I never knew what it was. Lavender, maybe. Maybe. He looked at what she was building. She would have liked this. Claire didn't say anything. She handed him a stem of rosemary. Hold this. He looked at it. Just hold it, she said. I need both hands for a second. He took it. He held it the way a man holds something he's been handed when he doesn't know what to do with it, carefully, a little awkwardly. And he stood there while she worked, and the room got quieter around them, and Elliot came and stood nearby, not close, but not far, the paper daisy still held in both hands, watching Claire's fingers move through stems and petals, and something that was slowly becoming real. The memorial was in 2 hours. It would not look like what anyone expected. It would look like Elena. The memorial started at 2 o'clock and ended at 4:17, and somewhere in the middle of it, Claire stopped being a florist and became something she didn't have a word for yet. She stood near the back wall with her empty supply case at her feet, watching people move through the room, watching them stop in front of the arrangements she'd put together in under 2 hours with what she'd had in the van. The daisies, the lavender, the rosemary that still faintly smelled like something alive. The freesia tucked in loose, not arranged so much as placed. The way flowers end up in a field, not in a shop. An old woman stopped in front of the largest arrangement for a long time. She had her hand pressed flat against her sternum, not dramatically, just resting there. Then she turned to the woman beside her and said, "That's Elena. That's exactly Elena." And she laughed, once, the kind of laugh that arrives through tears because it has nowhere else to go. Claire looked at the floor, breathed through her nose, got herself back. Elliot stood near his mother's portrait the entire service. He didn't sit. He held the paper daisy in both hands, and sometimes he looked at it, and sometimes he looked at the portrait, and sometimes he looked at the flowers, the real ones, the ones Claire had built, and his face held an expression that was still too old for him, but was something different from what it had been that morning. Less locked, less like a door you couldn't find the handle on. Vincent watched him from 12 feet away. He had been watching him the entire time. Claire noticed that about him, that his attention, when it was on the boy, was total. No phone, no side conversations. No one approached him, and he didn't approach anyone. And the distance he'd put between himself and the rest of the room was so complete it had become almost architectural. After the service, when the room had thinned to family and a few close friends, one of the older men, broad, silver-haired, the kind of face that belonged on a shipping company letterhead, stopped beside Vincent and said something close to his ear. Vincent listened. Didn't move. Said 3 words back. The man nodded and moved away, and that was the entire exchange. But it left a residue in the air that Claire, halfway across the room, could feel without being able to explain. She started breaking down her work table. She was folding the legs when Vincent appeared beside her. "What do I owe you?" he said. "Dolores has the account number." "I meant for today. The extra materials." She looked at him. "The daisies were already paid for. Different client." He was quiet a moment. "I want to pay for them. They were leftover. I would have composted them. Then I want to pay for your time." "Mr. Moretti." She folded the table flat and set it against the wall. "What you owe me for today is nothing. What your nephew needed today was the flowers. That's done. We're square." He looked at her for a moment with an expression she couldn't read. Not quite frustration, not quite respect, something between the two that hadn't settled into either. Then he nodded once and stepped back. She picked up her supply case. "The paper daisy," he said. She stopped. "Where did you learn that?" She turned. "My mother. She made them when she couldn't afford real ones." She picked up the case handle. "Sometimes the paper ones mean more. The kid who got them knows somebody took time." She left before he could answer. Well, the call came 2 days later. Not from Dolores. From Vincent directly, which meant he'd gotten her personal number from the shop file, which meant he'd either asked for it or taken it, and she found she wasn't sure which bothered her more. "I want to commission something," he said. No preamble. For Elliot. An arrangement for his room. I want it to be not formal, like what you did. What does he have now? A pause. Nothing. I took out all the arrangements people sent after what he did at the house. Another pause. I didn't know they were wrong until yesterday. Claire held the phone against her shoulder and looked at her work table. She had 3 orders due by noon. She was already behind. Bring him to the shop, she said. Silence. He's 8, she said. He should pick what goes in his own room. Bring him Thursday. The silence extended long enough that she thought he was going to say no. Then, 10 o'clock. He hung up. She put the phone down and went back to her work and tried not to think too hard about what she'd just agreed to, because Vincent Moretti bringing his grieving nephew to her flower shop was a simple professional arrangement, and she was going to treat it exactly that way. She believed that for approximately 36 hours. They arrived at 9:52. She saw the car first, black, expensive, the kind with tinted windows that don't advertise themselves. No second car. No visible security, which she'd half expected. Vincent got out of the driver's side himself, which she hadn't expected at all. He came around and opened the back door, and Elliot climbed out, wearing jeans this time, a green sweatshirt, his hair not combed as carefully as it had been at the funeral. He looked more like a child and less like a small formal event. He stopped on the sidewalk and looked at the shop window. Claire had put daisies in it. Not a display arrangement, just a mason jar of loose daisies on the sill, like something you'd find in a farmhouse kitchen. Cheap, unstudied. Elliot looked at them for a long moment. Then he walked to the door and pushed it open himself. Vincent stood on the sidewalk, watching, and his face did that thing again. The thing that had no clean name, the thing that lived somewhere between grief and longing. Then he followed the boy inside. The shop smelled the way it always smelled, green and earthy and faintly damp, the refrigeration units along the back wall humming low, bundles of stems wrapped in paper, loose petals on the work table from the morning's orders. Not pretty in a staged way. Working space pretty. Elliot walked in slowly, stopping at each table, looking carefully at what was there. He didn't touch anything. He bent down to smell a bundle of eucalyptus, and then straightened up with an expression of mild offense, which surprised a laugh out of Claire before she caught it. Yeah, she said. Takes getting used to. He looked at her sideways. Not unfriendly, cautious. She went around behind the work table. Come here, I'll show you something. He came. Vincent stayed near the door, which was the right instinct, and she was quietly grateful he had it. She had paper ready. The same paper she used for the funeral daisy. Plain white, lightweight, not origami paper, but close enough. She set a square in front of Elliot on the work table and folded one herself, slowly, narrating nothing, just doing it. He watched her hands. When she set the finished daisy down, he picked it up and turned it over. Then he set it down and pulled the paper square toward himself. He made 2 folds, looked at them, made a third. His fold was wrong, the petal came out asymmetrical, too wide on one side. He looked at it, set it flat, tried again. Claire didn't correct him. She started another one of her own. They worked in silence for 7 minutes. Vincent, from the doorway, didn't move or speak, which was, she would think about this later, a kind of self-control she hadn't expected from a man with his reputation. She'd have bet money he was a fixer. A man who walked into problems and applied force until they resolved. Watching him hold himself still while his nephew struggled with paper folding was watching a different version of the man than the one she'd heard about. Elliot's 4th attempt came out close. He held it up and looked at it. One petal still slightly off, but the overall shape there, recognizable. A daisy. His daisy. He set it on the work table and looked at Claire's. He picked hers up in one hand and his in the other and held them side by side. Then he put Claire's down and kept his. Vincent exhaled quietly through his nose, and when Claire glanced over, he was looking at the ceiling for a moment with his jaw working, and then he looked back down and met her eyes, and she looked away first. They spent an hour in the shop. By the end of it, Elliot had selected, through a system entirely of his own invention, picking things up, holding them, setting them aside, or keeping them. A bundle of daisies, 2 stems of lavender, a small bunch of rosemary, and a single yellow freesia that he had gone back to 3 times before finally taking it. He carried the bundle to the counter himself. Claire wrapped it in brown paper. When she tied the twine around it and slid it across to him, he held it in both arms like you'd hold a small animal. She didn't name a price. She wrote it on a slip and handed it to Vincent, who looked at it and reached for his wallet. "The paper flowers," he said, looking at the pile of attempts still on the work table. "I want to learn." Claire looked at him. "For him," Vincent said, not defensively, just factual. "He'll want more eventually. I should know how." She looked at the paper on the work table. She looked at Vincent. She thought about three things quickly: her schedule, her better judgment, and the look on that boy's face when he'd held his lopsided daisy beside hers and chosen his own. "Saturday mornings," she said, 9 to 10 before I open. One lesson." He nodded. She wasn't entirely sure what she'd agreed to, but she wrote it in her calendar that evening, in pen, because she had a policy about commitments, and she was going to treat this one exactly like all the others. She believed that for approximately 4 days. Sophia Marino called the shop on Friday. Claire almost didn't take it. The name came through on the caller ID, and she stood looking at it for 2 rings before she picked up, because she had a second policy, which was that she did not avoid things. "I heard you've been spending time with my cousin," Sophia said. Her voice was composed, professionally warm, with something underneath it that wasn't warm at all. "I provided a service for a client," Claire said. "Of course." A small pause. "I want to apologize for the other day. I was trying to do right by the family, and I misjudged the situation. I'm not who you need to apologize to." "No." Another pause, longer. "Claire, can I call you Claire? I want to give you some information because I think you're in a situation without all the facts." Claire said nothing. He's not a simple man," Sophia continued. "His world is complicated in ways that affect the people close to him. His last relationship ended very badly. A woman was hurt. Not by him directly, but proximity has consequences in his world. I'm not saying this to be cruel. I'm saying it because you seem like an intelligent woman, and I think you deserve to know the kind of company you're keeping." Claire was quiet for a moment. "Ms. Marino, you altered a funeral order to impress business associates. You replaced a dead woman's favorite flowers with roses she would have hated at her own memorial in front of her child. I'm going to need you to explain to me why I should weight your opinion about anything heavily." The line was very quiet. "I'm trying to help you," Sophia said, and her voice was different now. The warmth gone, just the thing underneath it. "I know you think that," Claire said. "Don't call this number again." She hung up. Her hand was steady. The rest of her was slightly less steady, which she addressed by going back to her work table and finishing the arrangement she'd been working on, stem by stem, until her breathing evened out. She thought about what Sophia had said. She wasn't naive. She knew Vincent Moretti's name and what it attached to, and she had not forgotten it for a single hour since the funeral. The question of what exactly she was doing, a professional arrangement, a one-time paper folding lesson, a Saturday morning that had nothing personal about it, was a question she had been successfully not examining for 4 days. She examined it now, briefly, sitting at her work table with her hands in a bundle of stems. Then she set the question aside and finished the arrangement, because she had an order due by 5, and she wasn't a woman who let herself drift. Saturday came cold and gray. Vincent arrived at 8:58, alone, in a different car than the black one. This one was older, practical. She registered that without knowing what to do with it. She had paper on the work table. She had coffee made because she always had coffee at that hour, and it would have been more pointed to not offer it than to offer it. She poured 2 cups and set his on the far end of the table and went back to her side. He sat where she indicated. He wrapped both hands around the coffee, but didn't drink it immediately, which was a thing she'd noticed before. He processed environments before he moved through them. It was the kind of habit that either came from extreme caution or from a life where rushing had cost him something significant. She placed a paper square in front of him. "First fold," she said, "diagonal, corner to corner." He made the fold. Clean, precise. The kind of precision that came from someone who was used to doing things correctly on the first try, because in his world, a mistake had a different weight than in most worlds. "Good," she said. "Second fold. Take the top point down to the center line. Not all the way. About 2/3. He did it. slightly too far. He looked at it and, without being told, lifted the fold and adjusted it. She waited. "Third fold," she said. "Mirror that on the left side." He worked in silence. He was not a natural. His hands moved with precision but without intuition, which made sense. Precision and intuition were different muscles. You could have one without the other. She had both, which had taken her years. After the first daisy, they looked at what he'd made. The petals were even, technically correct, and completely rigid. It looked like a diagram of a daisy, not a daisy. "It's too tight," she said. He looked at her. "The tension in your hands." She set her own beside his for comparison. "You're controlling every fold. A paper flower needs a little give. If you hold it like you're making sure it can't go anywhere, it ends up looking like exactly that." He looked at the two daisies for a moment. Then he said, in a tone that was so flat and completely without self-pity that she almost missed it, "I don't know how to do things loosely." She heard the weight in it. Not a complaint, not a bid for sympathy, just information about himself delivered like a fact about the weather. "I know," she said. "Most people who are good at control don't." She moved her coffee cup. "That's why it takes practice. The folding is easy. The loosening is the whole lesson." He looked at the paper square. "Again," he said. She placed another square in front of him. "What?" 3 Saturdays passed. 4. He came every week at 8:58 and left at 10:03 or 10:04, never later. He brought Elliot on the second Saturday, unannounced, which she had complicated feelings about and addressed by simply pulling out 3 paper squares instead of 2. The boy was better at it than Vincent immediately, which made sense. Children hadn't yet learned to grip. On the 4th Saturday, a man appeared outside the shop window at 9:20, large, standing at an angle to the glass that was too casual to be casual. Claire noticed him between the second and third fold and didn't say anything. On the 5th Saturday, there were 2. She mentioned it on the 6th. "The men outside," she said, not looking up from the paper. "They're yours." Vincent's hands stilled. "Yes." "Did something change?" A pause. "There's been some activity in my business." He folded the paper with the careful looseness he'd been developing. He was better now, the flowers less rigid, almost natural. "It doesn't concern you." "It concerns me if it's standing outside my shop window." He looked up. He held her gaze with an expression that was honest in a way that surprised her. Not defensive, not managing her, just direct. "I can have them move down the block." "I'd prefer you tell me what's going on." He was quiet for a moment. He looked at the paper daisy in his hands, then he set it down. "There's a man named Carver, Gerald Carver. He's been making moves on some of my operations. Historically, he's kept distance because—" He stopped, started again. "Because the cost was too high. That calculus has shifted." "Since Elena died," Claire said. His jaw tightened. "Yes." "They think you're distracted." He didn't answer, which was an answer. She looked at the paper daisies on the table, at his hands, loose now, resting on the paper, at the things she'd been successfully not examining for 6 weeks, which were stacking up now into something too tall to walk past. "Are you?" she said. He looked at her. "Distracted," she said. The words sat between them. Outside, one of the men had shifted position. The refrigeration units hummed. Somewhere in the back of the shop, a bucket of stems dripped slowly. Vincent picked up the paper daisy. He turned it over once. He had the looseness in his hands now. Real looseness, not performed. And the flower looked like a flower, not a diagram. "I've never been distracted before," he said. "I didn't have anything to be distracted by." Claire looked at him for a long moment. She thought about Sophia's call, about the thing underneath Sophia's warm voice, about proximity and consequences, which were real words that described real outcomes regardless of who said them or why. She thought about Elliot holding 2 paper daisies, his lopsided one and her perfect one, and choosing his own. "You should know," she said, "that I don't have a version of this where I'm not myself. Whatever this is." She gestured between them with one hand, economical, precise. "I'm a florist. I have a lease, 3 employees, and a policy about not getting involved in things I don't understand. I am telling you clearly that I don't fully understand your world." "I know," he said. "I'm not finished." She held his gaze. I'm also telling you that I'm not a woman who makes decisions out of fear. Your cousin called me. She told me about a woman who was hurt. She was trying to scare me off. She picked up her coffee. I want you to know I'm aware of the risks. I'm making a clear choice to be aware of them. If that changes, I'll tell you directly. Vincent was very still. She called you, he said, last Friday. Something moved across his face. Not the controlled thing she usually saw, but something more immediate, colder. His hands closed on the paper daisy and the petals creased, just slightly, before he registered the pressure and released it. He looked at the flower, at the small creases, at what his hands did when he wasn't watching them. Sophia, he said very quietly. It wasn't really directed at Claire. Vincent. She set her coffee down. What did she do? Pass the flowers. He looked up. There's more, Claire said. I've been in this room with you for 6 Saturdays. I know what your face looks like when something is closed and when it's open. Right now it's open and you're about to close it. She held his gaze. Don't. The refrigeration units hummed. He looked at the table, at the paper daisies, his getting better every week, the petals holding their looseness now, at the empty squares waiting. Elena's estate, he said. He stopped, pressed his thumb against the crease in the daisy petal, smoothing it. There was money for Elliot. She set it up years ago, a trust, through a private attorney. Small, but enough to give him choices when he's older. He stopped again. 3 weeks after she died, I found out the trust had been restructured. The attorney was replaced. The beneficiary designation was changed to a holding company that runs back to Sophia's accounts. Claire went very still. Elliot's money, she said. Yes. She took a dead woman's trust fund from an 8-year-old. Vincent said nothing, which was yes. Does Elliot know? He's 8. Does your attorney know? We found it 4 days ago. His voice was completely level, which was its own kind of sound. The levelness of something held very tightly. It's being addressed. What does addressed mean in your world? He looked at her. It means the money comes back. And Sophia? He held her gaze and didn't answer, and in the space of that silence, she understood several things about the man across the table from her that she could not unknow now that she knew them. Not all of them frightened her. Not none of them did. She was at the memorial, Claire said. She saw Elliot. She saw what he did with the flowers. She saw the boy's face, and she had already taken his trust fund. She felt something cold and specific in her chest. She looked at that child and she had already done it. Yes. The word was quiet. Final. The kind of quiet that had mass. Claire put her hands flat on the table and looked at them for a moment. Outside, the gray morning had gotten grayer. One of the men had moved. She could see the edge of his shadow shifting in the window light. From somewhere above the shop, a pipe knocked twice and went silent. She looked up at Vincent. Bring Elliot Saturday, she said. Whatever is happening with Sophia, whatever is happening with this Carver, bring the boy. He should keep coming. Vincent looked at her. He's making progress, she said. That doesn't stop because your world is complicated. He stood up. He straightened his jacket, a habitual gesture, something his hands knew without instruction. He picked up his paper daisy from the table and held it for a moment, and then he set it down again. Leaving it, she realized, not taking it. He left it every week. The daisies accumulated in a small cluster near the left edge of her work table, getting less rigid, more real, week by week. Claire, he said. She looked at him. The woman Sophia mentioned, on the phone. He held her gaze without flinching. Her name was Marie. We were together for 2 years. She left because she was afraid. Not because anything happened to her. But she was right to be afraid because the potential was real. He stopped. I'm telling you that because you told me not to close. And because you deserve actual information, not managed information. Claire held his gaze. Thank you, she said. He nodded once. He walked to the door. He had his hand on the frame when Elliot's voice came from the back of the shop. Not a sound, not a gesture, but a word, small and clear as a stone dropped in still water. Loose. Vincent turned. Elliot was standing in the doorway to the workroom, which he'd been occupying quietly for the past 20 minutes, which neither of them had entirely registered. He was holding a paper daisy he'd been making on his own. He was looking at Vincent's hand on the door frame. Loose, he said again. and held up the daisy to show what he meant. The petals with give, not grip. The word had been the first one in 11 weeks. Vincent's hand came off the doorframe. He stood completely still in the way that wasn't controlled stillness, but the stillness of a man whose body has stopped taking instructions because something larger has taken over. Claire didn't move either. Elliot looked at them both, apparently unimpressed by the effect he'd had, and went back to his paper folding. Vincent turned back toward the room. His face was entirely open, which was the most dangerous she had seen him look, because open was where the real man lived, and the real man was someone she was. She acknowledged this now, clearly, without managing it, not going to be able to keep a professional distance from. Outside, footsteps on the sidewalk. One of Vincent's men moving closer to the door. Inside, the refrigeration units, the dripping bucket. Elliot's paper rustling. Somewhere across the city, Sophia Marino was making her next move, and Gerald Carver was calculating costs and distances. And the world that Vincent came from was not going to stop being what it was because an 8-year-old boy had said one word in a flower shop on a gray Saturday morning, but the word had been said. And Vincent Moretti was still standing in the middle of the room, holding nothing, with his hands completely loose at his sides. The word hung in the air for the rest of that day. Claire swept the workroom at 5 o'clock, which she always did, going through the same motions she'd gone through for 14 years. Dustpan, bucket, the careful gathering of stems and petals from the floor. But her hands kept slowing down without permission. She'd find herself stopped in the middle of the room holding the broom, not thinking about anything in particular, just stopped, and she'd have to consciously restart herself. Loose. One word. 8-year-old boy. 11 weeks of silence and then one word aimed at his uncle's hand on a doorframe, precise as a surgeon. She put the broom away and turned off the lights and stood in the dark shop for a moment before she remembered to leave. The call came at 6:43 Sunday morning. She was awake. She was always awake by 6. Another habit from years of early deliveries. Standing at her kitchen window with coffee, watching the street below come to life in the slow gray way of a Chicago November morning. The number was one she didn't have in her contacts. She almost let it go. Ms. Rowan? A man's voice. Not Vincent. Older, smoother, with an accent that had been mostly trained out but left traces in the vowels. My name is Gerald Carver. I believe we have a mutual acquaintance. She felt the cold go through her before she identified it. Not fear exactly. The precursor to fear. The body registering threat before the mind has named it. I don't believe we do, she said. Vincent Moretti, Carver said pleasantly. I understand you've been spending time with him, and with his nephew. A pause. Lovely boy. I saw him once, at the building on Lakeview. He was waiting in the car, patient kid. He had seen Elliot. He was telling her he had seen Elliot. The detail about the car was not accidental. It was a coordinate, precisely placed. She kept her voice level. What do you want, Mr. Carver? Just to introduce myself, he said, and to suggest that the flower business is a nice, clean profession, the kind of work that keeps a person out of complicated situations. Another pause. I'd hate to see that change. The line went dead. She stood holding the phone for a moment, looking at nothing. Then she set it on the counter and picked up her coffee and drank it standing up, both hands around the cup, working through what had just happened in deliberate order the way she worked through anything, starting with what she knew for certain and building outward. What she knew, Carver had her number. Carver had been watching Vincent's building. Carver had seen Elliot in that car and filed the detail away and was now deploying it with careful, practiced precision to communicate something very specific to her. Not a threat. Not yet. A demonstration of reach. I know where the edges of your world are. I can touch them. What she didn't know. How long he'd been watching. Whether Vincent knew she'd been contacted. Whether the men Vincent had posted outside her shop on Saturdays were already aware of Carver's surveillance, or whether the surveillance had found gaps between them. She picked up her phone and called Vincent. He answered on the second ring, which meant he was already awake, which meant his Sundays were not restful. Carver called me, she said. Silence. Then, when? 6 minutes ago. He had my personal number. The quality of the silence changed. What did he say? She told him. Verbatim, because she had the kind of memory that locked down under stress instead of fragmenting. Vincent listened without interrupting. When she finished, there was a pause of about 4 seconds. "Don't go to the shop today," he said. "I have orders due Monday." "Claire?" His voice had changed, the careful modulation gone, something more direct underneath it. "He called you at dawn on a Sunday. That's not information sharing. That's a move. He's telling me he has access to you. Don't go to the shop alone today. I'm asking you." She looked out the window. The street below was still quiet. A man walking a dog. A woman with a grocery bag. Everything ordinary and surface level safe. "He mentioned Elliot," she said. Another silence, different from the first ones. Dense, pressurized. "I know," Vincent said. He didn't mean he'd known Carver would call her. He meant he understood what it meant that Carver had named the boy. "What's happening?" Claire said. "The real version, not the managed version." A long pause. "I'll come to you." "Vincent, 1 hour," he said, and hung up. He arrived in 52 minutes, alone, no visible security, which told her the security was present, but invisible, which was somehow more unsettling than the obvious kind. He was wearing dark clothes, no jacket despite the cold, and his face was the specific exhausted quality of someone who hadn't slept rather than someone who'd slept badly. She put coffee in front of him. He wrapped his hands around it. The same gesture as always, the hands that needed something to hold. "Sophia didn't act alone," he said. Claire sat down across from him. "The trust restructure. I told you we found it 4 days ago. What I didn't tell you was what we found when we dug into it." He looked at the coffee. "The holding company Sophia routed Elliot's money through. It has a second owner, silent partner, Gerald Carver." The information landed. Claire let it settle before she responded. "Sophia's working with Carver," she said. "Has been. We think for about 8 months, before Elena died." He looked up. "Which means the trust restructure wasn't opportunistic. It wasn't Sophia seeing an opening after Elena was gone. It was planned. Before. While Elena was sick." The cold went through her, slower this time. "While Elena was sick," she repeated. "Sophia knew Elena was dying." "Elena had a diagnosis, glioblastoma. They gave her 4 to 8 months. She made it 9. He set the coffee down. "Sophia knew. She was at the hospital. She had access to Elena's medical records through a family health proxy she'd been given years earlier, before things went bad between them." "Before things went bad," Claire said. "What does that mean?" He was quiet. "Vincent." "Elena knew something about Sophia," he said. "I didn't know what, until 3 days ago. My attorney found a letter. Elena left it with the original trust documents, before the restructure, sealed, with instructions that it be opened only if something happened to the trust." He reached into his jacket pocket and set a folded envelope on the table. He didn't push it toward her, just set it there. Claire looked at it. "Elena knew Sophia had been feeding information to Carver for years," Vincent said, "about our operations, about our family structure. She found out, and she kept it because she was afraid of what I'd do. She didn't tell me. She tried to handle it herself, which meant she tried to buy Sophia's silence, which..." He stopped. His jaw worked. "Which meant Sophia knew Elena knew. And Sophia knew Elena was dying. And Sophia knew that once Elena was gone, there was no one keeping the secret." Claire was very still. "So, Sophia moved first," she said. "Before Elena was even gone. She restructured the trust, built the connection to Carver, positioned herself." "Yes." "And Carver, what does he actually want? Not Elliot's trust fund. That's not why a man like that gets involved." "Carver wants the Lakeview building," Vincent said flatly, "and the Harrison Street distribution network. The trust fund is pocket change to him. It was a test, to see if Sophia could deliver. If she could take money from a dead woman's estate right under my nose, and I wouldn't find it until she was ready for me to find it." He paused. "We found it earlier than she planned. That's why Carver called you. He's accelerating." Claire looked at the envelope on the table, at Vincent's hands around the coffee cup, at the line of his jaw, which was doing the thing she'd learned to read as the outer edge of something he was barely managing to contain. "Did Elena know she might not outlive the timeline?" Claire said. "That she might not be there to protect Elliot when Sophia moved?" He didn't answer. "The letter," Claire said. "She left it where it would only be found if the trust was touched. She planned for the possibility that she wouldn't be there. She was trying to protect him from the other side of it." Her voice had gone quiet. She left a trail for you. Yes, he said. The word was almost inaudible. Claire reached across the table and picked up the envelope. She didn't open it. She held it flat in both hands for a moment, feeling the weight of it, which was just paper and nothing else, and somehow more than that. Your sister spent her last month sick and scared and trying to protect her son from a woman you trusted, Claire said, and she couldn't tell you because she was more afraid of your reaction than of Sophia. The sentence landed on him the way she'd known it would. She watched him absorb it without flinching, the flinch happening somewhere interior, where she could see it only in the small tightening around his eyes and the way his hands went very still on the cup. I know, he said. She was right to be afraid of your reaction. I know that too, he said, and his voice was completely flat, the flatness of something that had been examined and owned and was not going to be argued with. She set the envelope back on the table between them. What happens now? She said. I handle it. Vincent, the legal recovery of the trust is already in motion. That part is clean. My attorney, a judge who owes me nothing, paper trail that Sophia can't touch without implicating herself deeper. He paused. The Carver situation is different. How different? He looked at her directly. He didn't answer. Tell me how different, she said. Claire. His voice was steady and not unkind. There are parts of what I do that you said you don't fully understand. I'm going to respect that you said that. She held his gaze. He called me. He put Elliot's name in his mouth at 6 a.m. Whatever you're deciding to do or not tell me, he already made me part of it. I'm not asking you to protect me from information. A long pause. Something moved through his expression. Not reluctance, exactly. More like the look of a man making a precise calculation about what honesty costs and whether he can afford it. Carver has a legitimate business front, he said. Commercial real estate, some import, some legal construction contracts. He runs everything else through it. He's been untouchable because he's very good at keeping the legitimate side genuinely clean. He paused. But Sophia gave him access to our family accounts to run the trust money through. That money moved through channels it shouldn't have. It left marks. You have documentation. My attorney has documentation. Which means you could go to the authorities, Claire said. The expression on his face was not quite a smile. Not humor. More like the recognition of a word that came from a different language than the one he lived in. My attorney could bring it to a federal contact, carefully, in a way that takes Carver off the board without putting me on it. And Sophia. Sophia made her choice, he said, and his voice on those 4 words was the voice of a man who had finished grieving something and arrived at the other side, which was not peace but a colder country than peace. Claire looked at him. She's your family, Claire said. She was Elena's family. He picked up the coffee. Elena is dead. Sophia stole from Elena's son while Elena was dying in a hospital bed. That relationship is closed. The finality of it was not cruel. It was specific. It was the kind of line that some people drew in pencil and others drew differently, and she was understanding now which kind of man sat across from her. Where's Elliot right now? Claire said. At the house. 2 men I trust completely. He doesn't know any of this. He shouldn't, she said. He's 8 and he just started talking again. She pushed back from the table and stood up. I'm going to the shop. I have orders due Monday. Vincent looked up at her sharply. I'm not hiding in my apartment because Gerald Carver called me at dawn, she said. That's not who I am. If your people are watching the shop, fine. I'll work and they can watch. She picked up her coffee cup and took it to the sink. But I'm not rearranging my life around a man I've never met just because he wants me to feel like he has reach. Vincent was quiet for a moment. Then he stood up. I'll drive you, he said. I have a car. I know you have a car. His voice was even. I'll drive you. She turned from the sink and looked at him. He was standing by the table with his jacket in one hand, waiting, not commanding, waiting, which she'd learned was different from him and not easy, and she recognized the effort in it. Fine, she said. The shop was quiet. Sunday morning quiet. The refrigeration units humming, the smell of damp stems, the paper on the work table still holding the shapes of Saturday's lesson. Claire went to her work table and started pulling orders. Vincent sat on the stool near the window that no one ever used, and he stayed out of her way, which was what she needed from him, and he seemed to understand that. She was halfway through the first order, a sympathy arrangement for a funeral Tuesday, white freesia, and something green, deliberately simple. When she looked up and found him looking at the cluster of paper daisies he'd left on the edge of her table over the past weeks. 6 of them now, each one slightly different from the last. The first one's rigid and controlled. The recent one's softer, the petals carrying give. "She would have liked you," he said. He didn't explain who. "You don't know that," Claire said, not unkindly. "Elena liked people who didn't manage her." He picked up one of the daisies, the most recent one, the softest. Everybody around her managed her, especially after the diagnosis. Everyone got very careful about what they said and how they said it. She hated it. He turned the daisy over. "She told me once that the worst part of being sick was that people stopped being honest with her, like the truth might accelerate things." He set the daisy down. "You would have argued with her." "I argue with everyone," Claire said. "She would have liked that," he said. Claire kept her hands moving through the stems. She didn't respond because there was nothing to say to that wasn't going to change the temperature of the room, and she had work to do. She was reaching for a bundle of greenery when the back door opened. She stopped. Her back door was locked. Had been locked since 6 a.m. She'd checked it when she came in. She'd checked it every time. It had a bolt and a secondary lock, both keyed. Vincent was on his feet before she registered he'd moved. A woman stepped through the back doorway. Late 30s, dark coat, holding her hand slightly open and away from her body in the universal demonstration of no weapon. Her face was tight and frightened in the way that was different from performed frightened. Sophia Marino looked, in this moment, nothing like the composed woman from the funeral. Her hair wasn't right. She had the yellowish look of someone who hadn't slept in more than one night. There was a bruise at the edge of her jaw that was still new, still purpling, that she hadn't tried to cover. "I need to talk to you," she said to Vincent. "How did you get in?" Claire said. Sophia's eyes moved to her briefly. "I've had a key for 2 years, corporate account copy." She looked back at Vincent. "I'm not here to—" She stopped. Started again. "He hit me." Vincent looked at her without expression. "Carver." "Yes." "Why?" "Because the money moved early. Because your attorney started pulling threads before I was ready. He thinks—" She pressed her fingers against the bruise, a reflexive gesture, then dropped her hand. "He thinks I tipped you off. He thinks I've been working against him." She looked at Vincent and her face cracked slightly at the edges. Not crying, just the muscles losing some of their hold. "I didn't. I need you to know I didn't. He turned on me because his timeline accelerated and he needed someone to—" "Sophia." Vincent's voice was very quiet. "Why should I believe anything that comes out of your mouth?" She flinched. "I know what I did. I know you found out about the trust." She kept his gaze, which Claire could see was costing her something. "I can help you with Carver. I know his full structure. I know where every account is, who the contacts are, which officials are on his payroll, how the import front actually works, everything." She paused. "I'll give you all of it." "In exchange for what?" Vincent said. "Protection," she said. He knows where I live. He knows my car. I have—" She stopped again, and this time the stop was different from the others. Not strategic, but stuck. Like she'd arrived at something she hadn't planned to say. "I have a daughter. She's 4. She's at my mother's house in Evanston. He doesn't know about her yet, but he will because he's methodical, and he will look until he finds every—" "Stop," Vincent said. She stopped. He stood looking at her for a long time. His face was unreadable in the way it was unreadable when he was running calculations too complex and too fast for any of it to surface. Then he turned to Claire. It was the last thing she expected. To be consulted in this moment, by this man, in this situation that was so far outside her understanding of her own life that she had no frame for it. He turned to her and he didn't speak. He just looked at her, and the look was not asking for permission and not asking for an answer. It was the look of a man who had spent his life making decisions in isolation, who had, without entirely planning it, arrived somewhere new. Claire looked at Sophia, at the bruise, at the controlled fear in a woman who was clearly very good at not showing fear and was currently unable to hide it. She looked at Vincent. "The daughter," Claire said. "She's safe right now?" Sophia nodded. "Then you have maybe a few hours before that changes," Claire said. She looked at Vincent. "You need to move fast." Vincent held her gaze for one more second. Then he turned back to Sophia. "Call my attorney. Right now, from this room. You give him everything. Accounts, contacts, names. how the import runs, who the officials are, all of it. His voice was precise and businesslike, stripped of everything personal. Everything you give him goes to the federal contact by tonight. You testify, if it comes to that. Your daughter goes to a location I choose until this is done. You don't make a single independent decision about your safety or hers without running it through me first. He paused. If you agree to every single one of those conditions, I will make sure Gerald Carver cannot touch you or her. Sophia was quiet. Then, and after? What happens to me after? We'll discuss that when Elliot's money is back in Elliot's account, Vincent said. She looked at him for a long moment with an expression that was grief and desperation and something smaller and harder to name. The look of someone who had made catastrophically wrong choices and was only now, when it was almost too late, seeing them at their actual scale. Then she nodded. Vincent reached for his phone. He was dialing when Claire's phone rang. She looked at the screen. Unknown number. Different number than Carver's morning call. She answered it. Miss Rowan, the voice said. Not Carver. A woman. Flat, professional. The voice of someone relaying information rather than having a conversation. This is a courtesy call. Mr. Carver would like you to know that the boy was seen leaving the house on Lakeview 20 minutes ago. He went for a walk with one of Mr. Moretti's associates. There's a park 2 blocks east. The line went dead. Vincent was still on the phone with his attorney. Claire crossed the room in 4 steps and put her hand on his arm. He looked at her. She showed him the screen, the unknown number, the timestamp. She said quietly and precisely, Elliot, park 2 blocks east of your house, 20 minutes ago. The change that moved through his face in that moment was not the controlled thing and not the open thing she'd seen before. It was something more primary than both of those. The face underneath all the faces, unguarded, and it was pure fear. He dropped his arm to his side. He said 2 words into the phone to his attorney, hold on, and looked at Claire and said, stay here, with a voice that was the stripped-down, no-argument version of every other thing he'd ever said to her. He was out the back door before she finished her next breath. Sophia stood in the middle of the workroom, looking at Claire. The bruise on her jaw had gone darker in the shop light. Outside, through the front window, Claire could see one of the watching men break from his position and move fast down the sidewalk in the same direction Vincent had gone. The refrigeration units hummed, the paper daisies on the work table rustled slightly from the air displaced by the slamming door. Claire picked up her phone and looked at the unknown number and thought about a 4-year-old girl in Evanston and an 8-year-old boy in a park, 2 blocks from a house on Lakeview, and a man running toward one of them with everything he had. She thought about what Sophia had said. He's methodical, and he will look until he finds every, and felt the sentence complete itself in her mind in a way that made the cold in her chest stop being just cold and become something more specific and more urgent. She looked at Sophia. You know everything about Carver's operation, Claire said. Yes, Sophia said. Does he have people who could get to a child in a park in 20 minutes? Realistically. Sophia's face answered before her mouth did. And Claire, who had a policy about not getting involved in things she didn't fully understand, picked up her keys. Claire had never run in her work boots before, and she found out immediately that the left one had a loose sole that slapped the sidewalk with every stride, a stupid detail, the kind of thing that belonged in a different kind of day. She went out the front because the back was the direction Vincent had gone, and she didn't want to tangle directions. She turned east on the sidewalk, moving fast without running yet, because running attracted attention, and she didn't know who was watching or from where. The morning had gone full gray now, low cloud cover, the kind of November light that flattened everything and made distances hard to read. She called Vincent. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. She hung up and called again. Same. She put the phone in her jacket pocket and started running. The park was 2 blocks east and 1 north. She'd passed it 100 times. A narrow city park with iron fencing and a handful of benches and a small open area where people walked dogs in the morning. Not a playground, no structure to it. The kind of park where you could see everything from the entrance and everything meant you were also visible from the entrance. She came around the corner and stopped. Vincent was already there. He was standing inside the iron fence near the center of the park, and Elliot was beside him, and Elliot was fine, upright, unhurt, wearing his green sweatshirt, looking confused by the sudden reappearance of his uncle. The man who'd been walking with Elliot, one of Vincent's large, dark jacket, was standing 6 feet back with his hands loose and his face doing the specific thing faces did when they were accounting for what had almost happened while also communicating that nothing had actually happened. Claire stopped with her hands on her knees for a second, catching her breath. Vincent looked up and saw her. Something in his face shifted, the terror receding, leaving behind it the wreckage terror leaves, the exhausted and shaky aftermath of it. He said something to the man in the dark jacket, who nodded and moved toward the park entrance. Then Vincent crouched down to Elliot's level and said something to him directly, quietly. And Elliot looked at his uncle's face and nodded once, the grave nod of a child who doesn't fully understand the situation but understands that it's serious. Claire straightened and crossed to them. "He's all right," Vincent said. Unnecessary, but she understood why he needed to say it out loud. "I see that." Elliot looked at her. His eyes went briefly to her boots, which were still slapping at the sole, and then back to her face. "We should go back inside," Claire said. Vincent stood. He had his hand on Elliot's shoulder. Not tight, not directing, just present. Contact. She could see from the angle of his arm that it was taking effort to keep the grip easy. They walked back to the shop. Sophia was where Claire had left her, standing in the middle of the workroom, which impressed her slightly. She'd half expected the woman to run while they were gone. She hadn't. She was on her phone, speaking quietly and quickly, and when they came through the back door, she ended the call and looked at Elliot with an expression so complex it was almost unwatchable. Elliot looked at her for a moment. He didn't react the way Claire expected. No visible recognition, no sign of the betrayal registering. He just looked at her the way he looked at most things, carefully, taking his time, not rushing to conclusion. Then he went to the work table and sat down and picked up a piece of paper. The three adults stood around the room in a loose triangle, and none of them spoke for a moment. "My attorney is ready," Sophia said finally, to Vincent. "When you are." "Where's your daughter now?" Vincent said. "My mother's house. I called her. She knows not to answer the door." "Is your mother's name on any paperwork connected to you?" A pause. "Phone bill." "That's enough," Vincent said. He took out his phone and sent a text. One line, quick, his thumb moving without hesitation. "Someone's going to Evanston. They'll call your mother from a number she won't recognize. Tell her the word is Rosemary. She gives the girl to my person, and they go to a location I'll give her." Sophia looked at him. "Why Rosemary?" He glanced at the work table, at the bundle of rosemary Claire kept in a small jar near the paper squares. "Because I needed a word." Sophia made the call. Her voice shook slightly, and then steadied. She gave her mother the word, and Claire heard through the phone the sound of a woman who had been waiting for exactly this call, terrified and grateful at once. And then the call ended, and Sophia stood holding the phone with both hands and breathed. "Okay," she said. "Okay." "My attorney's name is Dennis Rourke," Vincent said. "You're going to tell him everything, starting with how you made contact with Carver. When, where, what he asked for first, what you agreed to first. The full sequence." "Here?" "Right here." Vincent pulled the second stool from the corner and set it beside the work table. "Right now, so." Dennis Rourke arrived at the shop at 11:40 with a leather briefcase in the calm, unhurried manner of a man who charged by the hour and was very expensive and worth it. He shook Claire's hand as though he were being introduced at a garden party, set up at the work table with a yellow legal pad and a small recorder, and began asking Sophia questions in a quiet, relentless sequence that left her no room to manage what she gave him. Claire took Elliot to the front of the shop. She set up the second work table, the small one she used for client consultations, and put paper squares in front of him and sat across from him, and they folded in silence while the sound of Rourke's methodical questioning came through the wall in low, steady waves. Elliot made 4 daisies. Each one was different from the last. He was experimenting, she realized, trying variations, changing the angle of the second fold to see what it did to the petal shape. He wasn't following her pattern anymore. He was developing his own. She watched his hands and felt something settle in her chest that was the closest thing to calm she'd had all morning. After a while, without looking up from his paper, Elliot said, "Is something wrong?" It was 6 words, full sentence, completely flat delivery, the way children ask direct questions before they'd learn to be indirect about them. Claire looked at him. "Yes," she said, "but it's being handled." He thought about that. "By my uncle." "Yes." He folded another petal. He fixes things, Elliot said. And the way he said it was not admiring and not afraid. It was simply observational, the fact of his uncle laid out plainly, the way you described the weather. He tries, Claire said. Elliot looked up at her. Do you fix things? I make things, she said. That's different. He considered that distinction with the focused seriousness he applied to everything. Then he looked back at the paper. Making is better, he said. She didn't respond, but she felt the sentence land somewhere specific and stay there. Rourke emerged from the workroom at 12:58, alone, and spoke quietly to Vincent near the window. His face was professionally neutral, but his eyes had the particular quality of someone who had received information that exceeded expectation. He showed Vincent something on his phone, a document, a list, something he drafted while Sophia talked, and Vincent read it without visible reaction, which was itself a reaction. He handed the phone back to Rourke, and the two of them spoke for another minute in voices too low for Claire to catch. Then Rourke picked up his briefcase and left. Vincent came to the front of the shop. He looked at the paper daisies on the consultation table, at Elliot, who was on his seventh variation, entirely absorbed, at Claire, who was watching him watch. How complete is it? Claire said quietly. Complete enough to end Carver, Vincent said. His voice was level, but underneath the level was something compressed and coiled that she recognized now as the thing he carried when consequences were unavoidable and arriving fast. Rourke makes contact with the federal people tonight. Sophia testifies. The accounts, the officials, the import front, all of it on record by morning. And Carver knows his timeline has collapsed. He'll know by tonight. Which means between now and tonight is the window, he said. They looked at each other. What does he do in the window? Claire said. A man like that, when he knows it's over. He makes it cost, Vincent said. Whatever he can't save, he makes sure it costs the other party as much as possible on the way down. What does that mean specifically? Vincent was quiet for a moment. He has people who are very good at making statements. Not quiet things, visible things. Things that say, even if you win, look what it cost you. The shop was very quiet. The boy, Claire said. Or you, Vincent said, and his voice on those two words was the most stripped down she'd ever heard it. No management at all, just the raw sentence. She looked at him steadily. He doesn't know me. He called you at dawn. He knows enough. She thought about the phone call, about the word reach, about the man who had put Elliot's location in her ear like a coordinate, precise, and calm at 6 in the morning. How long do we have? She said. Rourke makes contact at 6. By 8, 9 at the latest, Carver will know the federal paperwork is in motion. He looked at the window. 7 hours. Oh. Vincent made calls for the next hour from the back workroom. Claire listened to the rhythm of them without the content. Short calls, decisive, the kind of calls where he spoke more than he listened. She kept Elliot at the consultation table and made coffee and let the boys' paper variations accumulate around them in a small, quiet world that was entirely separate from the one being assembled one room away. At 2:15, Vincent came back through. Elliot, he said. The boy looked up. We're going to stay here tonight, Vincent said. He said it the way he said things to the boy. Not managing, not softening. Plain. Claire's shop. It's the safest option right now. Is that okay? Elliot looked at Claire. She nodded. He looked back at his uncle. Can I bring my blanket? Vincent's face did the open thing. Yeah, he said. Somebody's going to go get it. Elliot considered. The blue one, not the other one. The blue one, Vincent said. Got it. By 4 o'clock, the shop had transformed in a way Claire couldn't have anticipated. One of Vincent's people, a woman, which surprised her, 30s, quiet, someone who moved through the space without displacing anything, had arrived with a bag and positioned herself near the back door. A second man, someone Claire had seen before outside on Saturdays, took up position near the front. Neither of them was visible from the street. Elliot's blue blanket arrived at 4:30, along with a paper bag that contained, among other things, a container of leftover pasta, which Elliot received with the most direct display of positive emotion Claire had seen from him. He ate at the consultation table and dropped 3 pieces of penne on the work table and picked them up with total focus and put them back in the container with the conscientiousness of someone who knew this wasn't his table. Claire was in the back workroom with Sophia, who had been quiet for 2 hours and was now sitting with her back against the wall and her knees drawn up, looking at the middle distance with the expression of someone doing interior accounting. "The bruise," Claire said. She hadn't planned to bring it up. "When did he do it?" "Yesterday morning." Sophia's hand went to her jaw. "I told him the trust recovery was moving faster than I'd planned. He thought I'd tipped Vincent. I hadn't." She paused. "I was planning to. I just hadn't yet." Claire looked at her. "Why hadn't you yet?" A long pause. "Because I was still deciding if he'd protect me or use me as a buffer." She met Claire's eyes. "I needed to know he'd actually protect me before I gave him everything." "That's not an unreasonable calculation," Claire said. Sophia looked slightly startled, as though she'd been expecting something different. "You made terrible choices," Claire said, "but you're not stupid. You were in a situation where you'd already committed and the exits were narrowing and you were trying to time it right." She paused. "You timed it badly." "Yes," Sophia said. "I did." "Your daughter," Claire said. "Has she been safe through all of this, the past months?" "She doesn't know anything's happening. She's 4. Sophia looked at the floor. "I kept everything away from her. That part She stopped. "That's the one thing I did right." Claire didn't say anything. She looked at the paper squares on the work table, some leftovers from the morning, some folded, some flat, the remnants of the hours she'd spent with Elliot while the adults negotiated the consequences of the adult world. She picked up a flat square, folded it, without thinking, into a daisy. Her hands knew the shape without instruction now. She set it in front of Sophia. Sophia looked at it. She didn't pick it up, but she put one finger on it lightly, and her face did something small and complicated that she turned away from too quickly for Claire to read completely. At 5:47, everything shifted. Vincent's phone rang and he answered it, and the call lasted 9 seconds. And his face, by the end of those 9 seconds, was the face of a man who has received information that changes the geometry of everything. He came into the back workroom. He looked at Sophia. "Carver knows," he said. "It's not 8-9 tonight. He knows now." Sophia stood up from the floor in one motion. "How?" "Someone in Rourke's office, clerical staff. He has people everywhere." Vincent's voice was completely level, which Claire understood now meant the opposite of calm. It meant the level above calm where you had no energy left to perform anything. "He's been notified that federal paperwork is in motion. We have maybe 2 hours before he decides how to use the window." 2 hours, Sophia said. "That's not enough time to... It's what we have." He looked at Claire. "You and Elliot need to go with Mara." He meant the woman at the back door. "There's a location." "No," Claire said. He stopped. "I'm not leaving you here," she said. "With Sophia alone while Carver's people are..." "Claire," his voice dropped. "This is not your situation to manage. You told me that in my shop, about my table, and I'm still here." She held his gaze. "If Mara can take Elliot to a safe location, she should. That's the priority. But I'm not going with her. I'm staying." The woman at the back door, Mara, looked at Vincent. He looked at Claire for a moment with the expression of someone who has calculated the argument and recognized it's not winnable. "Elliot goes with Mara," he said. "You stay. You do what I tell you." "If what you tell me is reasonable," Claire said. His jaw tightened. "Close enough," he said. He went to the front room where Elliot was. Claire heard him explaining it. Low, direct, no softening, and heard Elliot's response, which was a silence and then a single question she couldn't make out, and then Vincent's answer, which she couldn't make out either, but heard the tone of steady, certain, "I'll come back." Elliot appeared in the doorway of the workroom with his blue blanket over one arm and his stack of paper daisies, all 7 variations, in his other hand. He had packed them, which hit her somewhere she didn't expect. He looked at Claire. He walked to the work table and set the 7 daisies down in a row, carefully spaced, like a message she was supposed to read. Then he picked up the one closest to him, the first variation, the one with the widest petals, and held it out to her. She took it. He held her gaze for a moment, and she felt it, the full weight of him, this child who had gone 11 weeks without speaking and then found his way back one word at a time, looking at her with an expression that was not afraid and not performing bravery, just present, just fully, completely present in the way children were before the world taught them not to be. I'll be here when you get back, she said. He nodded. He turned and followed Mara out the back door without looking behind him. The door closed. The shop felt different with Elliot gone. Larger, somehow, and colder, the refrigeration units louder than they'd been all day. Vincent stood in the center of the front room with his phone in his hand, looking at the street through the window. The man near the front entrance had shifted position, closer to the door now, the shift subtle enough that you'd miss it if you weren't watching. Rourke accelerated the contact, Vincent said to the room generally. The federal paperwork is already submitted. What we're waiting on now is Carver's move. What move? Sophia said. She was in the workroom doorway, her arms crossed, the bruise on her jaw deeper in the shop's light. He can't stop the federal process. What he can do is make the testimony unreliable. Vincent turned from the window. He looked at Sophia steadily. You're the testimony. Sophia understood this. Claire saw it in the way she absorbed it. Not surprised, just having it confirmed. He's going to try to get to me, Sophia said, or discredit you. Make it look like the testimony is coerced or fabricated. He paused. Or both. What does that require from me? Sophia said. You stay in this building. You don't communicate with anyone outside except through Rourke. If Carver's people make contact, the front window exploded inward. Not the whole window. One pane, a single impact, fast and precise, and the sound of it was less like breaking glass and more like a sharp crack followed by a sustained crystalline collapse. The man near the door was moving before the glass finished falling, going sideways, getting low, saying something sharp into his earpiece. Claire dropped without thinking, behind the consultation table, her cheek against the cold floor, the sound of her own breathing very loud. Vincent was also low. She could see his shoes from her position, steady, not running. Sophia had gone backward into the workroom. One of the refrigeration units gave a short mechanical click and went silent. Then nothing. For about 15 seconds, nothing. The man near the door said something quiet into his earpiece, listened, then looked at Vincent and shook his head slightly. Not ongoing, one shot. Vincent straightened up. He crossed to the broken window and looked out without getting close to the opening. He looked at the floor where the glass had fallen, and then went still. He crouched down. He picked something up from the center of the broken glass. A rock, palm-sized, a rubber band around it, and under the rubber band a folded piece of paper. He removed the rubber band and unfolded the paper, and Claire, who had gotten up from the floor and crossed to him without entirely deciding to, looked at it over his arm. It was a photograph. Elliot. In the park. That morning. The green sweatshirt, the slightly uneven hair. He was looking at the ground at something, and the photo was close enough that she could see his expression, focused, interested, the expression he wore when something had caught his attention. Below the photograph, 2 words, printed in plain type. Still reachable. Vincent stood up slowly. He held the photograph and his face was the face she had never seen before. Not in 6 Saturdays, not at the funeral, not when Elliot had said his first word in 11 weeks. A face without any of the layers, every single one stripped back, and what was underneath all of them was not cold and not controlled and not powerful. It was the face of a man who was terrified for a child and was going to burn down everything necessary to make that child safe, and had already made peace with what burning things down would require of him. He looked at Claire. She looked back. "Call Mara," she said. He was already dialing. The call connected. He listened for 2 seconds, his jaw set. He looked at his man near the door and said one word, "Mara's car." The man was out the back before Vincent lowered the phone. Mara's car was not where Mara's car was supposed to be. They had left 8 minutes ago. The route to the safe location was 12 minutes. If the car was not where it was supposed to be, there were 2 explanations, and only one of them was recoverable. Vincent looked at the photograph in his hand. The paper daisy Claire had set on the work table, the one Elliot had given her, was still in her hand. She looked down at it. She looked at Vincent. The refrigeration unit that had gone silent suddenly kicked back on with a low hum, which was the most ordinary sound in the world, and in this moment felt almost obscene. "He's not in that car," Vincent said. His voice was barely above a breath. "Carver has him." The words were the most dangerous thing in the room, not because they were loud, not because they were delivered with fury, but because of how completely controlled they were, The control of a man who had moved through every stage of fear in the past 30 seconds and come out on the other side, in the place where fear became something else entirely, something that required absolutely everything. He looked at Sophia. Where would he take him? Vincent said. Not generically, specifically. Carver has a child and 2 hours before the federal paperwork lands. Where does he go? Sophia looked at him. Her face was white. The Harrison building, she said. The one he wants from you. He's been using the basement for... She stopped. He's been using it for 2 years. He knows the structure, the exits, which rooms don't have windows. He knows it better than you do. She met Vincent's eyes. He'd go somewhere he knows better than you do. Vincent looked at the broken window, at the glass on the floor, at the paper in his hand. The Harrison building was Vincent's building. Carver was in Vincent's building with Vincent's nephew, using Vincent's own walls as the cage, and had sent a rock through a flower shop window to say, "Come get him, I'm waiting. I know this ground better than you." It was an invitation and a trap, and Carver knew Vincent had no choice but to walk into both. Vincent put the photograph in his jacket pocket. He straightened his jacket with both hands, the habitual gesture, the hands that knew what to do, and he looked at Claire with a face that was completely open and completely decided. "Don't follow me," he said, and Claire, who had a policy about following people into situations she didn't understand, and who was standing in her broken flower shop holding a paper daisy made by an 8-year-old boy who was now in a basement 8 blocks away, looked at him and said nothing. Because some silences are not agreement, and he saw that in her face, and something moved through him. Not frustration, not argument. Something closer to recognition. The look of a man who has spent his life making every decision alone, standing in front of a woman who is not going to let him. He held her gaze for one more second. Then he turned and walked out into the gray November afternoon, and the bell above the shop door rang once, bright and small and completely absurd, and then the door closed, and he was gone. Claire stood in the broken shop for 11 seconds after the door closed. She counted them without meaning to, the way you count when your body needs something to do while your mind catches up to what just happened. The glass from the window was still on the floor. The refrigeration unit hummed. Sophia stood in the workroom doorway with her arms crossed and her bruised jaw and her face set in the expression of a woman who had run out of room to maneuver and knew it. On the work table, 6 paper daisies remained in a row where Elliot had left them. Claire put the one she was holding down beside them. She picked up her phone. She called Rourke. He answered on the first ring. "Carver has the boy," she said. "Harrison building. How fast can your federal contact move?" A pause. 2 seconds. The sound of a man recalibrating at speed. "The paperwork is submitted but not actioned. They need..." "How fast?" she said again. 2 hours minimum, possibly 3. "You have 90 minutes, she said. "After that, it won't matter what the paperwork says." She hung up. She looked at Sophia. "The Harrison building," Claire said. "You said he knows it better than Vincent. What does that mean exactly? What does he know that Vincent doesn't?" Sophia uncrossed her arms. "There's a service corridor on the sub-basement level. It was sealed off in a renovation 12 years ago. It's not on any current floor plan. Carver found it when he was doing assessment work on the building 2 years ago. He's been using it as an exit route." She paused. "If things go wrong for him, he doesn't go up and out through the lobby. He goes down and out through the corridor. It exits on the alley behind the dry cleaner on Marsh Street." Claire looked at her. "Does Vincent know about this corridor?" "No." "Do you know where on the sub-basement level the entrance is?" "East wall, behind a utility panel. There's a keypad, but the code is the same as his warehouse in Bridgeport. I was there when he said it." She said the code. 7 digits. Claire typed it into her phone. "Why are you helping?" Sophia said, and the question wasn't suspicious. It was genuine, the question of someone trying to understand the mechanics of a kind of person she didn't have much experience with. "Because an 8-year-old boy is in a basement," Claire said. She picked up her jacket. "And because I'm not a woman who stands in a broken shop and waits." Sophia was quiet for a moment. "I'm coming with you," she said. "No." Claire looked at her directly. "You stay here. You are the testimony. Without you, the federal case is thin. You are more important to Elliot's long-term safety in this building than you are anywhere else." She held Sophia's gaze. "That's not me dismissing you. That's the actual calculation." Sophia held her gaze for a moment, then she nodded. Claire went out the back. The Harrison building was 8 blocks northwest, a 12-story commercial building that Vincent's family had owned for 3 decades. Claire had passed it without registering it, the way you pass things that belong to a different layer of the city. Brick facade, steel lobby doors, the kind of building that looked closed even when it was open. She walked fast without running. The November air had gone sharp and damp, the kind of cold that got through jackets immediately, and she kept her hands in her pockets and her head down and moved through the afternoon foot traffic without drawing anything. She called Vincent twice. Twice it rang through to nothing. Not voicemail, just endless ringing, which was worse than voicemail because it meant the phone was on but not being answered, which meant he was inside and the phone was a liability. She turned onto Harrison Street at 341. There was a car parked across from the building, dark, nondescript, that had 2 men in the front seat who were not doing anything in particular, which was how she knew they were Carvers. She didn't slow down or look at them directly. She kept her line and turned south at the corner and came around to the alley behind the dry cleaner on Marsh Street. The alley was narrow and smelled like industrial cleaner and rotting cardboard and the cold. There were 2 dumpsters and a tangle of pipes along the brick wall, and at the far end, a door that looked like every other utility door in the city. Gray metal, no signage, a standard handle. She tried the handle. Locked. She looked for the keypad and found it behind a loose-mounted electrical box, which swung out on a hinge so rusted it moved in increments. The keypad was old, the kind with tactile buttons that left wear patterns on the most used numbers. She typed Sophia's code. Nothing. She stood in the cold alley with her heart beating in her ears and typed it again, more carefully this time, certain of the sequence. A click. Then the slow mechanical sound of a deadbolt retracting. She pushed the door open and went in. The sub-basement was exactly as dark and cold as she'd expected, and she stood just inside the door for a moment, letting her eyes adjust, one hand against the concrete wall. The space smelled like old water and metal, and something faintly chemical that she couldn't identify. A single emergency light at the far end of a corridor cast orange-yellow light that reached about 1/3 of the way and then gave up. She moved toward the light, keeping to the wall, putting her feet down carefully. The corridor turned right, and then opened into a larger space. A utility room of some kind, filled with the dark shapes of old equipment, decommissioned boiler components, coils of pipe. The orange light was stronger here, and there was another light source further on, white, steady, the kind that came from a work lamp or a phone. She stopped. Voices. 2 of them. One she recognized as Carver's, the smooth, measured voice from the phone call. The same careful cadence, slightly elevated now, but still controlled. The other was Vincent's, and Vincent's voice had none of its usual management. What she heard instead was the voice she'd first heard traces of when Elliot said his first word, the stripped-back version, the one that lived underneath the rest. She moved toward the doorway at the far end of the utility room. The door was ajar. Through the gap she could see light and the edge of a concrete column, and the back of a man's jacket. Not Vincent's, too broad, wrong cut. And then, at the edge of her sightline, a small shape on the floor against the far wall. Elliot. Sitting against the wall with his knees drawn up and his blue blanket clutched in both arms. Unhurt. She could see his face in profile, the set jaw, the same watchful expression he'd had at the funeral. Not crying, not frozen. Watching. She exhaled once, very quietly, and the tension in her chest didn't leave, but it redistributed into something she could work with. She put her back against the wall beside the door and looked at what she had on her person. Phone, keys, a folding knife she carried because she made early morning market runs alone and had for 14 years. She looked at the knife. She looked at the door. Then she listened. "The paperwork is already filed," Vincent said. His voice was coming from her left, inside the room. "You know that. Rourke filed it at 5. Whatever you do in the next hour doesn't change it." "It changes the testimony," Carver said. He sounded almost conversational, which was more frightening than anger would have been. "A grieving uncle is a less credible witness than a man who has reasons to be cooperative, and a woman who isn't there to testify." "Sophia's testimony is recorded," Vincent said. "It's already with Rourke. You'd need to—" "I need you to understand the position you're in," Carver said, and the pleasantness went out of his voice just for a moment, and what was underneath it was very cold and very old. "You brought a florist into this. You brought a child into this space. I didn't create these vulnerabilities. You did." A pause. "Where's Mara?" Vincent said. not to Carver. "She's fine," Carver said. "My people were instructed to be careful. I'm not interested in body counts. I'm interested in outcomes." A pause. "The boy is fine. He's been fine this entire time. I want you to see that. I want you to understand that I'm not the kind of man who hurts children." "You put a child in a basement," Vincent said. "I put a child in a room while I talked to his uncle. That's a different thing." Carver's voice was patient, instructive. "Give me the Lakeview property and the Harrison distribution access. Full transfer, notarized, tonight. The federal case becomes complicated when its primary witness recants, and when certain documentation about your own operation surfaces that Sophia was kind enough to preserve for exactly this contingency. You walk away with your nephew and your, whatever she is to you, florist." A pause. "I walk away with a transaction that should have been completed 18 months ago without all of this." Silence. "You think I'll give you the building to protect a child?" Vincent said. "I know you will," Carver said simply. "Because you spent 12 years not being the kind of man who protected anything, and then a boy lost his mother and something changed, and now you're a different kind of man. New men make different calculations." The silence that followed was the heaviest one Claire had heard yet. She could hear Vincent breathing from her position outside the door. Slow, even, the breathing of someone spending enormous energy on control. "Okay," Vincent said. Claire's hand tightened on the doorframe. "Okay," Vincent said again. "I'll sign the transfer, tonight." His voice was completely calm. "I need my phone to call my property attorney." "Your phone is on the floor in front of you," Carver said. "I can see the screen. You make one call, to your attorney, on speaker." A pause. The sound of a phone being picked up. Then, in the 2 seconds of silence before Vincent dialed, Claire heard something she was certain she alone could hear from her position outside the door. Vincent, very quietly, exhaled through his nose in a specific pattern. 2 short, 1 long. It meant nothing to Carver. It meant something to her because she had heard that exact exhale every Saturday morning at her work table when he was about to attempt a fold he wasn't sure of. It was not surrender, it was concentration. He was buying time. She moved. Not through the door, away from it, back into the utility room, fast and quiet. She pulled out her phone and typed a text to Rourke. "Harrison, sub-basement, east corridor. Now. Tell them to come in from Marsh Street. Side door. It's open." She hit send and put the phone on silent and moved back toward the door. Through the gap she could see more now. Carver, standing near the center of the room, a compact man in a gray coat, 60 or so, with the posture of someone who had been physically capable once and maintained enough of it to matter. One man behind him. To her left, at the edge of her sightline, she could see part of Vincent. His shoulder, his arm, his hand holding the phone. She looked at Elliot. He was still against the wall. He had turned his head slightly. Looking at the door, she realized, the gap in the door, the place where the light from the corridor came through. He was looking at her. He had seen her. His face did not change. He did not move. He held her gaze for a moment, and then, with the precision of someone making a very deliberate choice, he looked away, back toward the center of the room, toward Carver, drawing attention forward and away from the door. 8 years old. He had understood in one glance what she needed from him. She had never loved a child who wasn't hers in exactly that specific way before. The feeling had no precedent and was not the moment to examine it. She pushed the door open and walked in. Carver turned. The man behind him turned. Vincent's head came up. She had nothing in her hands. She had left the knife in her jacket pocket because walking into a room with a weapon, when you're outweighed and outnumbered, was not strategy. It was performance. She walked in with empty hands and stood where she could be seen clearly, and she looked at Carver, and she said, "The federal team is in the building." Carver looked at her. "They came in from Marsh Street," she said, "about 90 seconds ago. They have the sub-basement floor plan." She paused. "The old floor plan. The one that doesn't show this corridor." She held his gaze. "But I showed them where the door was." It was a partial lie. She had texted Rourke. She did not know if the federal team was actually here. She did not know if 90 seconds was accurate. She was making the bet that Carver was a man who'd built his entire operation on information control, and the one thing that would disrupt his calculation was an information variable he hadn't planned for. Carver looked at her for 3 seconds. The pleasantness was entirely gone from his face now. In its place was something more honest, the rapid, precise assessment of a man running options, understanding that the room had changed. His man took a step toward Claire. Vincent moved. What happened in the next 4 seconds was not clean and not controlled and bore no resemblance to any television version of violence. Vincent crossed the room and hit the man hard, using his shoulder and then his elbow. And the man was bigger than Vincent, but Vincent had the advantage of already being in motion and the psychology of a person who had decided completely and without reservation that there were no acceptable losses in this room. The man went down against the equipment along the wall with a sound that was mostly metal and some other things. Carver reached inside his coat. "Don't," said a voice from the corridor doorway. Mara. Standing in the doorway with a cut on her temple that had dried dark against her skin and her weapon up, two-handed, completely steady. Behind her, 2 men in federal jackets, and behind them the orange light of the corridor. Rourke had moved faster than 2 hours. 90 minutes, as it turned out, had been accurate. Carver's hand stopped inside his coat. He looked at the room, at Mara, at the federal jackets, at Vincent getting up from the floor, at Claire standing in the center of it all, with her empty hands. He looked at Elliot, who had not moved from the wall, who was watching everything with the expression of someone cataloging information for later. Carver took his hand out of his coat, slowly. He put both hands out at his sides. "Careful," he said to the federal agents. His voice was smooth again, the pleasantness back like a garment he'd picked up from the floor. "I'm cooperating fully." He was arrested calmly and without further incident, and the smoothness of his manner through the whole of it was the most chilling thing Claire had witnessed in the entirety of that day. She went to Elliot immediately. She crossed the room and crouched down in front of him against the wall and looked at his face, checking, methodically, the way you checked a person who'd been in a frightening situation, looking for the specific signs of shock that looked like calm, but weren't. His eyes were clear. His breathing was even. He was holding the blue blanket with both hands, and he looked at her with the expression she now knew well. The old-faced, taking his time expression, the one that meant he was processing rather than shutting down. "Are you hurt?" she said. "No," he said. "Were you scared?" A pause. "Yes." "That's the right answer," she said. Being scared was the appropriate response to this situation. He looked at her for a moment. "You came through the back," he said. "Yes." "I saw the light change under the door." He looked at the door in question. "I didn't look at you too long so he wouldn't see." "I noticed that," she said. "That was smart." He considered the word smart the way he considered most things, without accepting it immediately, turning it over. "I wanted him to stop looking at the door," he said. "So I looked at him." "People look where you're looking." "Yes?" Claire said. "They do." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, with the flatness that was not coldness but just his particular directness, "Is my uncle okay?" Claire looked over her shoulder. Vincent was standing near the center of the room, talking to one of the federal agents, his jacket torn at the shoulder, a cut on his left hand that he hadn't noticed yet. He was alive and upright and present, and the look on his face as he talked to the agent was the contained, functional look of a man finishing necessary tasks before he was allowed to feel anything. "Yes," Claire said. "He's okay." Elliot looked at his uncle. He looked back at Claire. He said, "You came too." "Yes." "He told you not to." "He did," Claire said. Elliot looked at the blue blanket in his hands. Then he held it out to her, not giving it to her exactly, more extending it toward her, a gesture she didn't have a precise translation for but understood to mean something specific and unmistakable. She took one corner of it. She held it between her hands. He held the other corner. They sat like that against the cold concrete wall until Vincent finished with the agent and turned around and found them. And the expression that moved through his face when he did was the open one, the underneath one, and it stayed this time instead of closing. He crossed the room. He sat down on the floor beside Elliot, which was not the posture of a man who controlled half of Chicago's criminal underground, and put his arm around the boy, and Elliot leaned into him with the complete, unselfconscious weight of a child who is finally, entirely safe. Vincent looked at Claire over the boy's head. She looked back. "Your hand," she said. He looked at it. It's fine. It's fine. It's bleeding. I know. He looked back at her. The cut was a secondary thing, and they both understood that. How did you know about the corridor? Sophia. Something moved through his face. Complex, unresolved. Not absolution, something more honest than absolution, which was the acknowledgement that a person could do terrible things, and one right thing and the accounting for both would take longer than this room. She stayed, Claire said. At the shop, she understood what her role was. Vincent was quiet. She has a daughter, Claire said. Not as excuse, as information. I know, he said. And the way he said it told her he had known about the daughter for some time, which told her something about the kind of knowing he carried. The knowledge you accumulate about people close to you that you hold without deploying, the complicated archive of a man who paid attention even when he wished he didn't. Elliot, between them, had closed his eyes. Not sleeping. She could feel the tension in the corner of the blanket she still held, just resting, allowing himself the posture of rest. It's over, Vincent said quietly, more to himself than to her. Most of it, she said. The parts that matter. She looked at the federal jackets moving through the room, the careful documentation, the methodical process of aftermath. There'll be proceedings, testimony. It won't be fast. No, he said. But Elliot's money is recoverable. Carver's operation is documented. Sophia talks and the whole structure comes down. He paused. The parts that matter are done. She thought about Elena's letter, about a woman who had spent her last months building a trail for a brother she loved and was afraid of and trusted anyway, in the end, when she had no other options. Your sister knew you'd find it, Claire said. He didn't answer immediately. He looked at the far wall, at the concrete and the old pipes, at the orange light. She knew I'd try, he said finally. She knew I'd be too slow to stop it and fast enough to fix it. A pause. She knew me. She trusted you, Claire said. Same thing, he said. And there was something in the way he said it that closed a door quietly, not avoiding the grief, just acknowledging that it had a permanent address now, and he knew where to find it, and it would not surprise him anymore. They came out of the building at 5:22 into the November dusk, which had gone deep blue and cold, the streetlights already on. The city resuming its ordinary business around the entirely unordinary thing that had just happened in a sub-basement 8 blocks from a flower shop. Elliot walked between them with his blanket. He held it around his shoulders now, a different configuration than before, not clutched to his chest but worn, cape-like, which was the posture of someone who had moved through something and come out on the other side still holding what mattered. Vincent got them a car. Not one of his, a plane car, called through an app, driven by a man who had no idea what had just happened, and asked them if they'd mind if the radio was on. Elliot said he didn't mind, which surprised the driver into a small smile. They went to the shop first. Sophia was still there. She'd found the broom and swept the broken glass from the window, which Claire noticed immediately and felt something complicated about. She had also, for reasons that were not entirely clear, folded 3 paper daisies which sat on the corner of the work table in a small, uneven row. They were not very good daisies. They were honest daisies. Elliot looked at them. He picked one up and examined it with his usual seriousness. The second fold is too deep, he said. It collapses the petal. Sophia looked at him. Her face did something that was not quite emotion, but was the room that emotion lived in. Show me, she said. He considered her for a moment, the way he considered everything, without rushing, without performing. Then he pulled a paper square from the work table and began to fold, slowly, showing each step, and Sophia watched his hands with the focused attention of someone who understood that this was not a lesson in paper folding. Vincent stood near the boarded window. Someone had put cardboard over it, taped at the edges, a practical temporary repair that was also slightly absurd, and watched his nephew teach his cousin the second fold. Claire stood beside him. She'll have to answer for what she did, he said quietly. Not tonight, but the accounting will happen. I know, Claire said. I'm not going to protect her from it. I'm not asking you to. He looked at her. I'm asking her to testify fully, and I'm making sure her daughter is safe while she does. Those two things can coexist. Yes, Claire said. They can. He was quiet for a moment. Is this comprehensible to you, the way this works, what I'm navigating? She looked at him steadily. It's not the world I live in, she said, but I can see what you're doing inside it. I can see the choices you're making. She paused. That's not the same as understanding everything, but it's enough for right now. He held her gaze. Right now, he repeated. One thing at a time, she said. That's how I work. He almost smiled. Not quite. The day had too much weight for quite. But the muscle moved, and she saw it, and it was enough. Months passed the way months do when something fundamental has shifted. Not cleanly, not in a straight line, but accumulating in small increments that you didn't always notice until you looked back and couldn't locate the person you'd been before. The federal case moved through its necessary stages. Sophia testified fully, twice, and the account structures Carver had built over a decade unraveled in the systematic way that well-documented financial crimes unraveled when the right people were paying attention. Gerald Carver was indicted on 14 counts. His legitimate business front dissolved inside 6 months, which meant the Harrison Building and the Lakeview property remained where they had always been, in a family that Carver had spent 2 years trying to take them from. Elliot's trust was restored to its original terms. Rourke handled it with the thoroughness that justified his hourly rate, and when the documentation was finalized and the account was whole again, Vincent sat at his kitchen table and looked at the paperwork for a long time before he signed it. Sophia entered a cooperation agreement that required her testimony and her presence in the city through the end of the proceedings. She saw Elliot twice during that period, once at the shop, once at a neutral location that Vincent arranged with the same precision he applied to everything. Neither meeting resolved anything. Both meetings were honest, which was different from resolved and sometimes more important. She left Chicago at the end of the proceedings. She took her daughter and her mother and she left. And she did not call Vincent, and Vincent did not call her. And the silence between them was not peace, but it was not war either. It was the silence of an accounting that had been made and was now closed. Elliot went back to school in February. He had a therapist, a woman on the North Side who worked with children and who, according to Elliot's first report, was okay but she has too many pillows. He spoke in sessions and sometimes at school and consistently at the flower shop, where he arrived every Saturday morning with Vincent and left with a new paper variation, and occasionally a bundle of whatever Claire had left over from the week's orders. His daisies evolved. By April, they had a signature, the second fold at a specific angle he'd developed himself that made the petals cup slightly inward at the tips, giving them a three-dimensional quality that Claire's flat version didn't have. She pointed this out to him once, and he received the observation with his usual unimpressed calm and said, "Yours are faster." "Speed isn't everything," she said. "It is if you're doing a lot of them," he said, which was so practically correct that she had nothing to say to it. Vincent learned to make Elliot's version. It took him 11 tries. The 11th one was right, and he left it on the corner of the work table with the others, and Claire lined them up one afternoon when the shop was quiet, all of them, hers and his and Elliot's, and even Sophia's 3 uneven ones, and looked at the row of them for a while. Different tensions, different hands, the same shape arrived at from different angles, with different amounts of certainty and give. She left them there. In June, on an ordinary Tuesday evening when the shop had been closed for 2 hours and she was finishing inventory alone, Vincent appeared at the front door. She let him in. He had stopped arriving with occasion, with purpose, with professional framing, with the managed approach of a man who was used to structuring his entrances. That had changed sometime around March, gradually, without announcement. He showed up the way people showed up when the shape of things had settled into something new. He sat on the stool by the window. She made coffee. "Elliot wants to plant something," he said, "in the yard. He asked me today if we could put in a garden." She turned from the coffee maker. "What kind?" He said wildflowers. He specifically said not roses. Vincent's mouth moved, the almost smile that she had learned to read now, all its variations. He said roses are too much work for too little. I don't know where he heard that. "That's a direct quote from me," Claire said. "Last March. He was here when I was doing an order. He absorbs everything." "Yes," she said. "He does." She brought the coffee over and sat across from him. "Daisies will work in a yard. Lavender, if you get the drainage right. Black-eyed Susans are hard to kill. He can start from seed if he's patient." "He's patient," Vincent said. "I know." She wrapped her hands around her cup. Bring him by this weekend and I'll put together a seed kit. Show him what order to plant them. He was quiet for a moment, looking at the work table, at the row of daisies, at the paper squares stacked in the left corner that had been there so long they'd become furniture. The anniversary is next month, he said. She knew which anniversary. Elena's memorial. The flowers on the floor. The boy in the suit with the two short sleeves. I know, she said. He wants to do flowers again. For her. He looked at his coffee. He told me this week he wants to pick them himself. He knows what he wants. Of course he does, Claire said. He said he wants a paper daisy in the arrangement, his version, the cupped one. Vincent paused. He said, and I'm quoting exactly, the paper ones last longer, so she can have it longer. The shop was very quiet. Claire looked at the coffee cup in her hands. She looked at the row of paper daisies on the work table, at the months of Saturday mornings accumulated in those small folded shapes, at the story you could read in them if you knew how, rigid to loose, controlled to present, one kind of man slowly becoming another without ceremony or announcement. She looked up at Vincent. He was already looking at her with the open expression, the underneath one, which was not a fragile thing anymore. It had become, over the months, the expression he simply had, the default face of a man who had stopped using the other ones. She's lucky, Claire said, to have him thinking about her like that. She'd have liked him, Vincent said. More than she liked me, probably. That's a low bar, Claire said. He laughed. A real one. It was a sound she'd heard a handful of times over the months, and it still had the quality of something unexpected, a door opening in a wall you'd thought was solid. Yes, he said. It is. They drank their coffee in the quiet shop. Outside, the June evening was warm, the street sounds drifting through the repaired window. A real window now, replaced in February, the same glass as before. You'd never know it had been broken. You'd never know most of it from the outside. That was how it looked. But inside the shop, on the work table, 12 paper daisies stood in a row in the low evening light, crooked and precise, rigid and loose, perfect and lopsided. And the story of every hand that had made them was in the petals, visible to anyone who knew how to look. Elliot knew how to look. He had always known how to look. That had been true from the very beginning. The boy in the funeral home, reading the flowers, seeing through the formal white roses to the lie underneath them, tearing them apart, not out of grief but out of the most specific and accurate kind of love. The love that will not accept a false representation of someone it knows. He had seen his mother in the daisy. He had seen his uncle in the stiffness of the first paper fold. He had seen Claire in the paper flower left beside the ruin, the small, deliberate act that said, I see what you're doing and I'm not going to stop you. 1 month later, on the anniversary of his mother's memorial, Elliot Mercer walked into Hartwell Funeral Home with a bundle of wildflowers in one arm and 3 paper daisies, his cupped version, made the night before at the shop with Claire and Vincent on either side of him. And he placed them in front of his mother's portrait with the careful, unhurried attention of a child who understood that the truth of a person deserved exactly that. He placed a real daisy beside a paper one. He looked at them both. Both, he said. The same word he'd someday say again in a year, and the year after that, the word that was not a compromise between two things, but a refusal to choose between them, grief and hope, memory, and now, the ones you've lost, and the ones still standing beside you. He stepped back. On his left, Vincent, who had put on a jacket and combed his hair, and was holding himself with the posture of a man at peace with where he was standing. On his right, Claire, who had brought extra paper squares in her jacket pocket because she'd known somehow that the moment would call for them, the way she knew most things, through attention, through patience, through the long practice of learning to read what people needed when they couldn't yet say it themselves. Elliot reached up and took both their hands. His was small, completely certain. Outside, November had returned, gray and cold and indifferent to everything that had happened in the year between one memorial and this one. The same light, the same city, the same distance between people who had not yet found their way to each other. But inside, holding the hands of a boy who had once gone silent for 11 weeks and found his voice again one word at a time, 2 people who had come to each other through the least likely door, through grief and paper flowers and broken glass, and the patient work of learning to loosen what you've spent a lifetime holding too tight, stood still. And the boy looked up at his mother's portrait, and the daisies, real and paper both, held their shape in the quiet air.